Thanks everyone for coming along today. It's been a bit of work to get this up and running, but it's really positive to see how well everyone supported it, how many people we've had in the room on all occasions. So yesterday we had well over 60 coaches here. We had a fantastic turnout this morning for the Women's Endurance Morning, and again I'm looking out and seeing a lot of interested coaches and athletes who are here to learn something and be a part of something. And that's fantastic. We want these sort of things to go on in the future. It's really important that we support it. And we always look at coaching and athletics as always looking to develop ourselves and be lifelong learners and students of our sport. And attending something like this shows us how serious we are about that. So I guess, how did this all come about and why are we doing it? I'd suggest it was actually 12 months to the day after Didyk. There was a group of coaches. We met with some the High Performance Staff Athletes Australia, and we're starting to look at how we supported a joint approach to altitude camps and heat, and we also largely thought, well, we can try and bring this all together. But what it did was just, for me as a coach sitting in the room, I actually felt rather fortunate. It was incredible how much I was learning. Just every time someone spoke, I was learning more and more about sometimes the complexities of things, learning about the timing to make things better for the athletes that I work with. And honestly, it felt like I was a very fortunate person in that room, but it's something that we largely acknowledge that we can't just have that group of people in the room learning from these opportunities. We need to be able to spread that message wider. And for me, working with some athletes in the high performance level, I'm very fortunate to have service providers who can support me and give me great advice. But I know that's not the case for everyone, and it certainly wasn't the case before I had athletes at that level to work with. So to be able to have some takeaways from today, learn how to put some plans together, learn how can we do things better, is a great advantage to all of us. And then hopefully at the same time, for coaches who start working with athletes who progress to being at a high performance level, you start to have the skills to then be able to work with those service providers more effectively, more efficiently, and more purposefully. As coaches, we want to be able to direct the plans that take place. So if we're rocking up to work with an exercise physiologist saying, can you put together an altitude plan, can you put together a heat acclimation plan for us, I don't really believe that's the best use of their time or yours. I think really as coaches we need to be accountable to the fact that has to work in with the competition schedule, our training programs and the rest of it. So to at least have that heads up to go in and say, look, these are some of the considerations I have as a coach. I've got a competition here for this athlete, this is a really key competition here, I need a qualifying opportunity here. And so how are we going to fit some of the altitude training in? How are we going to cope with the heat and prepare for some pretty tough climates? And there'll be a lot of talk today about Doha, which is, I'm sure we could all imagine for those who are already planning for that, or those who are just going to watch on TV, it's going to be a very tough environment for our athletes to prepare for. And then we look on to Tokyo in 2020, and it's just as difficult, and we're looking at one of the most extreme levels of heat discomfort that's probably been in an Olympic Games. So for us as coaches and for the athletes in the room who have ambitions of going to some of these events, it's really key that we get some of these real specifics right to give them the very best opportunity performing at that level. So I guess from my end, one of the takeaways that I want you all to have from a day like today is take away some thoughts and some questions about what you can do better. Okay? Ask questions of how you can do it better and how you can make things work better for your athletes. And start to think about how you might put together some planning to cater for hot conditions and how we can use altitude training better. I mean, we do have a lot of heat here in Australia, even for our domestic season, so it doesn't need to be as fancy as going to a competition outside of our domestic season. Realistically, here in Australia, we put up with a great deal of heat, and to know how to use that better will be really advantageous to all of us. So Julian Perriard is going to focus on heat. I've asked him to really answer that question for you as to how you can all use it better here in Australia. So just going through the schedule today, we've got Craig Hilliard about to have a bit of a chat to you about some of the things that are being focused on from an AA perspective in relation to high performance for endurance sports. Andrew Fakenley, unfortunately, is in a meeting with the AOC this morning, but he will be coming across later on. I think it's really important that he gets the opportunity to have a few words, so we'll just slot him in between a couple of the presenters later in the day for 5 minutes. Brent Vallance is going to cover some of the conditions that we need to prepare ourselves for with the coming championships, and also go through some case studies of things that he's done with his athletes in the past when they've been quite successful in some challenging conditions. Julian Perriard will be, who was actually recommended to me by Dick Telford. He said, this guy is the man you need to speak about heat. So we were fortunate enough to get Julian to come along today and to share some of those thoughts. And he'll not only go through some planning considerations and some concerns that you need to have about it and how you make it work better, but also some management strategies for, pre-race, how we adapt to those conditions, what we can do post-race to help recover and all the rest of it. Philo Saunders, who many of you would know with his mohawk at the back, he's obviously coaching at a very high level, but his research and attitude is second to none, and he's world renowned for that. So I feel we're really, really fortunate to have people like Philo in our system, and we really should be taking advantage of it, and that's why I've asked him to come and talk to us today. And then Nick Bedeau, who is famous for his training camps up at Falls Creek and the likes overseas, is going to come and talk to us about some of the considerations he has when preparing for a training camp, some of the cultural attitudes that he puts in place with his athletes to make it a successful preparation period for his athletes. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. And in speaking to Nick to prepare for today, there were some great pearls of wisdom coming out in our conversation. I'm looking forward to him sharing that with all of you today. So without hogging the microphone for too much longer, I'll introduce Craig Hilliard, Head Coach at Athletics Australia, and I'll have a bit of a chat to you first. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. I'll preface my remarks. I'm not going to present as such, but I just want to make some observations. But firstly, thanks to Adam for pulling this together. And it's great to see the volume of people who turned up today, this morning. And thanks to all the girls and the distance runners who got together. I think that was absolutely fantastic. And also for yesterday's presenters. So it's really healthy and really encouraging to see. From my viewpoint, probably since Rio, distance running's in a pretty good space. So you people in the room should really be congratulated in terms of what you've done, and I think collaboratively where you're going as a group. I think some big inroads have been made in the distance fraternity, not just from 800 right up to marathon, but also the walks. And I think culturally, the more and more you can get together in conferences like this and gatherings like this or event-specific groupings, the more you're going to learn. And as Adam suggested, it's really encouraging to see the number of people here. Because there's not one recipe that works for everything. And I think as coaches, you have to keep evolving the whole time. And if you're not, and not challenging yourself, or the athletes challenging you, or you challenging them, you don't advance yourself. And we're all guilty of doing the same things, because when a recipe works, you want to keep doing that. It's been successful. But you can't keep doing the same thing, because the rest of the world is still doing this, and you can see where a lot of the events are sitting, and the depth in the events right through from 800 to marathon. But we've had, as I said, a really good period in the last couple of years in terms of records, national records, personal bests. The athletes, I'm going to go through them. Swain, Deng, Hall, Bowl, Small, Sullivan, Griffiths, Diver, Waitman, Trengo, Rayner, Thomas, the list goes on. Danebird Smith, Montag, and recently Claire Talent. So, we've got a lot of depth in a lot of events, and certainly distance running in the world is very strong and incredible depth, and to get to that top level is hard. Making a final is hard. But if you're striving to achieve that and keep having that as your goal and keep challenging yourself, you can get there. And we've proven that. We proved that in Rio, and hopefully we can prove that again at Doha and into Tokyo. Looking forward, I went to Falls Creek last year for the first time. I've been up to Thredbo with altitude camps and Perisher in the past with walkers, and it's great, brilliant environment. And you look up there and you think, wow, this is a pretty good place to train, which it is. And you see the numbers of people who flock up there, awesome. You look at the training ideology and the work ethic, brilliant. But I came down the mountain and I just sort of was thinking to myself, and it was pretty busy when I was up there, and I think Craig Mottram said to me, it's much busier than this, mate. This is half the sort of traffic we get up here in really busy times. I said, wow. And I looked at some of the sessions, and there are go-to sessions that are done that everyone joins in, which is brilliant because it challenges everyone, and you see what the best athletes are doing. So you're seeing what the elite are doing, the junior athletes are saying, wow, if I want to get to the top, that's what I've got to do. But I drove down the mountain and I was thinking, okay, the athletes are up here for 2-3 weeks, beautiful environment. But are they all doing those same key sessions? Like, does everyone just do those sessions because that's the session that's sort of the go-to session, and that's what you do at Falls with the, I think it was the 1K run session. And maybe you've got to look at yourself and saying, well, is that really the best for me? If I'm an 800 metre runner or a 1500 metre runner, is that the best session for me? If I'm a 10K runner, where's the mix? What's the right recipe there? So it's like maybe change your thinking or challenge your thinking in terms of what you're doing. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just you've got to question why you do that. If you're doing it just because you want the athletes to join in that session and get the benefit of working with the elite athletes or seeing what they do, or you're actually working the right recipe for where your athlete is at physically, mentally, emotionally. So there's a whole range of different things you need to look at and work on. It's not just do that because everyone's doing it. So be creative in your approach and be very specific and tailor-made to the athletes or the group of athletes you're working with, because there's a vast difference between training for middle distance, 800 metre running, for 1500 metre running, for 5K running, for steeplechase. Yes, there's a lot of crossover, but physiologically there's a lot of differences. They're all interwoven. Looking ahead, some of the adaptations and for Doha and Tokyo, they're two similar environments, but they're also vastly different. One, as Adam alluded to, you're not going to have the radiant heat factor that Tokyo will have. The stadium is air conditioned, and Nathan Sims and I are over there in September, exactly the same time as when the World Championships will be on, and they can turn that stadium down to 18 degrees to 26 degrees, so they can actually control it. It's quite freakish. So the day we were there was about 38 degrees in the morning, so it was pretty cooking by about 11 o'clock. We walked into the stadium, did the tour, and you walked in and I thought, you could feel a little bit of a breeze, and I thought, it's not windy, it's dead still. Then you saw these massive, great big tubes situated at various levels around the stadium. So they can put the air into there. So for your middle distance athletes, and most of the athletes who are going to be competing there, it's not going to be so much of a problem. It will be still for your 5 and 10K runners, and you'll have humidity to deal with. So radiant heat-wise, no, but certainly from a humidity factor, yes. And the other thing is, there's not great places to train there leading into the actual game. So you're still going to have to spend time in, it's almost like vacuum heat. And for those of you who've travelled quite a bit and have gone through Doha or anywhere in the Middle East, when you get off the plane at midnight or 1 a.m. in the morning, you usually just get this, and you've got to jump around and you think, wow, this is pretty skanky. Well, that's pretty much what it stays like, and that's what it'll be through the whole 24-hour period. So you have to take those factors into consideration. We've been pretty good at dealing with climates and getting athletes prepared over the years, and I think we have a fairly strong and proud tradition of getting athletes right and performing when it counts. Atlanta was super hot. A lot of athletes used Cairns as a pre-training camp, and then we ended up in Raleigh, which was very similar conditions to Atlanta. In 2007 in World Championships, Nathan Didyk won the gold medal there. We used Kochi, which was in Japan, as a pre-training camp for a couple of weeks to get that final adaptation, acclimatisation. That went really well. We had all the walkers there. Jana Pittman also turned up there and trained. Prior to Beijing, we also used the same facility again. So all the walkers went back there and did their final preparation and heat acclimation into Beijing, and that went pretty well. And Jared Talon performed super well there, and Brent had his whole squad over there, and he can talk about in his presentation, some of the things that they did and carried out both prior to and also during and also at the games. So we've been good at preparing athletes. So I think whilst there's a bit of an alarmist, it's going to be hot, it's going to be hot, I think as long as you're prepared and you have a plan, and as Adam referred to, you actually start those discussions and work out, all right, well, what am I going to have to do? And it's similar to Commonwealth Games. That was very hot for the marathon, super, super hot day. But most of our distance athletes, marathoners, prepared up in Noosa or Sunshine Coast and had that final preparation, adaptation, which allowed them to perform there that day. Otherwise, if they'd come from a cool environment, they would have been spanked. Generally, we've worked off, in terms of adaptation, minimum 7 days, but generally 10 to 14 days. And there's also been some pre-adaptation prior to that, whether you're using heat chambers back at home before you go overseas, or at least whether you're in an environment where it's warm and you're still getting, obviously, a European summer. The danger is that most of the walkers, and certainly a lot of the distance athletes, will do altitude training. So the problem with altitude training is you're up at obviously a lot cooler temperature, usually around 18, 20 degrees, sometimes colder. It's even snowed sometimes. So the problem is you then come down into a warm environment, and certainly early days, when a lot of the opposition were up in the altitude and coming down into a camp situation very late, they didn't get that adaptation they needed. So altitude training, in effect, became a complete and utter waste of time. So you need to actually get the final adaptation correct before you worry about the altitude. If you're going to combine those things, you need to have a plan about that. If you're coming down 21 days beforehand, which is generally the model we've worked off in the past, then you have enough period of time then to go into a warm environment and prepare yourself adequately. Wakayama was another environment we used, which was in Japan prior to Beijing in 2015, which worked really well. And again in Rio, we went to Florida. Again, it wasn't our first choice, but the camp we were going to fell over. The track and everything couldn't be used, so we had to find a new environment at the last minute. But it actually worked out quite well. It was hot and it was humid. But it actually prepared the athletes a bit better for what they were going to get in the stadium, because in the stadium, in Rio, it was like a microclimate. It was about 6 or 7 degrees warmer than it was in the village. So a lot of the nights were quite humid and the temperatures were still sitting on high 20s. So by chance, in some ways, a lot of the distance athletes got a much better top-up of acclimation than they probably would have got if we'd been in the other dry heat climate that we're in. So there's a lot of things you need to factor in if you're going to do altitude training and you're going to a warm environment. So again, you need to plan for that, come up with a program and talk to the specialists on how you're going to do it. You can't just do it on a whim and a prayer. It doesn't work like that. And particularly when you're combining travel, altitude, and then travel back to warm climate, there's a lot of factors in there. So it's not just the adaptation, it's also the travel component as well. So if you're doing a lot of travel, there's another factor to factor in. I've seen many athletes in the past who've come into training camps, and particularly the warm weather ones, and they smash themselves. Most of your training should be done by the time you get to that final sort of 14-day period, 7-day period. You're really just ticking over. There might be 1 or 2 key sessions you earmarked that you actually you want to have a really good hit out in, and to get an adaptation that's sort of similar to race pace and what you're going to be expecting. But you don't need to be out there murdering yourself. And I've seen a lot of athletes who've gone in there and they've killed themselves with just backup sessions and really doing way too much volume. So it's something just to keep in mind when you're doing your final preparation. You should be done and dusted by then. There's no more racing. All your racing's finished. You might have a time trial that you're going to plan to put in there. Week out, 10 days out, 4 days out, whatever your program does and what you've replicated in the past, but just be mindful of the conditions that you're operating in. A couple of other observations. In Barcelona, which was obviously back in 1992 Olympics, dry heat, sort of most of the messaging that went out was, yeah, you've got to drink, you've got to drink, you've got to drink, it's going to be hot. So everyone drank, but a lot of them just drank water. There weren't a lot of sort of electrolyte fluids available there as there had been at post championships and Olympic Games post Barcelona. And in effect, a lot of the athletes basically just flushed their systems out. They drank so much water, because everyone's saying, you're drinking, you're drinking, you're drinking, I'm drinking, I'm drinking, I'm drinking. It just went straight through and they flushed everything out of their system. So a lot of the athletes were still cramping, distance athletes were suffering from cramps and having a whole host of problems in those environments. So, you know, there's lessons to be learned in terms of fluid intake as well. And again, they're conversations you need to have with your coach and with your nutritionist and come up with a plan and trial some of those things. There's no point going into a major race with a new food plan or fluid plan and you haven't trialled it, at least in training or in another similar race situation. that's a recipe for absolute disaster. So all those things need to be worked out in advance. I know Louise Burke's done a lot of work with the walkers, just in terms of the amount of fluid and foods that they can get into their system. Particularly for the 50k walkers, you're out there for a long period of time. So you need to have a plan and a program in terms of what fluids you're taking in, when you're taking them in, and when you're getting some extra shots and hits and whatever you've worked out. So again, have those conversations. In terms of looking ahead for Doha and planning around that, it is really late in the year, which next year presents a really awkward sort of program, not just for us, but for the rest of the world, being so late. And we're sort of even experiencing that now, because your mindset's, well, I'm not competing till September, October. You know, I don't really need to be peaking at the moment. But you've still got to be getting good quality work done now. You've still got to be racing and testing yourself out and seeing if your programs are working. And then you've got to handle that sort of length of time post-nationals to September. And that's the awkward bit. So you can't be staying at a high level up here the whole time. You've got to get training in, but you've also got to compete. So again, there's things you've got to sit down and really work out your year, how much travel you're going to have to do, and that becomes another component. You can't stay away in Europe for 5 months unless you've robbed the bank recently, or, you know, it's just prohibitive to live in Europe for that length of time. So we will have, I think, not a huge number of athletes who are going to be in Europe in that sort of late August period and into September, unless they're in the Diamond League. There'll be very few competitions posted. There'll be a smattering of competitions, but it'll be only really the key athletes who can get into those meets who will be remaining in Europe. So there are things you have to factor in. If you're going to Europe and you're racing, you've got your qualification, you're in the team, you need to then work out, well, okay, am I going to stay here or am I going to come back home? What am I going to do when I come back home? If you're from Melbourne, I wouldn't be staying here unless you're in the heat chamber pretty much every day and doing work in there every second day. So we'll look at having a holding camp up in Cairns for those athletes who've come back. That's the plan at the moment. I'll have a pre-departure from there. For those people who will be in Europe, has to be confirmed yet, but we'll probably be operating out of the ETC in the final little bit before we go into Doha. It's only a 6-hour flight, there's only a 1-hour time change, so in terms of travel that's fine. Coming from Australia, obviously it's a 14-hour trip, 6-7-hour time change, so a few more things to factor in. They usually land late in the evening anyway, so you can get into your routine pretty quickly, and the program's late in the afternoon and evening anyway, so in terms of adaptation to that, I don't think that will be a huge problem for us as compared with some of the logistical problems we had travelling from into Rio. So again, a couple of things to factor in there. The ETC, in terms of future use, we want to use that now that there's 2 tracks available there. It won't suit all distance runners. I know some distance athletes have been there in the past and it's a bit hilly in that sense, but if it's there for a short period of time and you're doing more track work and what have you, it really is a good place to hold up. They've got everything there. As I said, with 2 tracks available, both one at Veracey, now one a local club at Gabarati, which is where the ETC is, it sort of opens up a few more doors for us. We just have to fight with rowing and cycling, who've normally pre-booked those places for the last 10 years, for 3 months of June, July, August. So, but we can get in there in September, and there are some other available accommodation. So you live off-site and still use the facilities. You'll have to pay for that unless you're an AS athlete, but that's an available option for athletes who are looking for other one-stop shops. Leuven we're possibly looking at next year as a holding camp, not just for distance athletes, but as a European hub. We've used Cologne in the past for a number of years now, for 10 years I think. And whilst it's good, it's getting a bit stale, and there's a few factors there that it just hasn't been that easy to get things facilitated. So I think as much as a change-up, Leuven will be pretty good. A lot of the distance athletes have used that in the past, and some of our technical event athletes, they've got 2 tracks there which we can use. Facilities are pretty good. Accommodation options are not huge, that's the only problem. There's not a lot of Airbnbs and things there, but you can stay at the university. So, and it's got an indoor area as well. So it's set up pretty well there, and so we'll probably look at using that as a hub. Obviously there'll be some altitude training going on as well. We can't service everyone. It costs a bomb for us to send our medical staff, physios, masseurs, away overseas. Obviously, we link them around our key cohort of NAS athletes. And when you become a team member, obviously you get access to those physios and masseurs. But for us to send groups of medical teams away, soft tissue therapists, what have you, away for a month, 2 weeks, or over that, it costs a lot of money. It's not just an air ticket and a bit of accommodation, because they're service providers. So it's just not as easy as saying, yeah, we'll get a physio, off you go. So we need to work together on that. So again, you know, in your conversations with people, because we've used Flagstaff in the past and that's worked very well. We've used St. Moritz in the past, that's worked very well. Some people have gone to Livigno in Italy, that's worked well. All have benefits. And Nick's taken his group to Avila, to another smaller place now, which has worked very well for him, and we've serviced that in the past as well. So we've got to be quite stringent and also managed in terms of how we program that. So again, have your discussions, and if you're thinking of doing Flagstaff and it ties in, I know we've had lots of groups go there in the last few years, then come up with some dates that sort of suit and we can see what we can do. So again, collaborate, get the discussions going. Because we want to help out our key athletes. We don't want key athletes going away and falling over because we can't service them properly. It's pointless. So we try and replicate what we can offer them back here, overseas, but it does come at a cost. In terms of some of your heat chain work, I mentioned that before, and certainly Brent will discuss some of those things he's used in protocols in the past very successfully. We've used at the Institute at Canberra University with Philo, and also Brent did use altitude plus heat acclimation in St. Moritz. So again, be creative, and it was sort of, I think that was London, wasn't it, Brent, you used it? So again, talk to him why he did that, how he did it, how he set it up, because it was a creative way of what I talked about before, overcoming the problem of training at altitude but at lower temperature, knowing that we're probably going to get a skanky day in London, which we did get for the walks, and actually getting that adaptation done. So again, a lot of things to put into the brain box and work out how you're going to plan it. Cairns I mentioned. Tokyo, the turn of the other awkwardness with this season is it's going to finish late as well. So this will be the latest championship we've ever had, then leading into another major. And on top of that, Tokyo's earlier than normal. So the turnaround time post-World Championships into Tokyo is quite small. So the time you get home, resynthesise, refresh, get yourself sorted out, October's gone. You're into November. Olympics are in July, August. July 31st, track and field starts. So it's a short time. We have to fit our domestic season in there as well. On top of that, we still don't know what the IAAF are doing with their new system. I suggest it'll probably come in. As most of you know, they're going to trial it this year because there were too many ifs and buts about it, and there was a fair bit of pushback from some of the larger federations. And we certainly put in a few of our complaints about how the system may be rolled out with regard to status of events in this country, opportunity for us, the fact that athletes can get points for shorter distance racing in hurdles. Well, we don't have an indoor track. So again, there are things that work against us. We're not going to travel to Europe in February just to run a 60-metre hurdle. So there are things that we're disadvantaged by. So there are a whole bunch of things that impact on us this season, and we need our best athletes out, certainly in some of the key events, to be performing, because those meets are going to be reviewed by the IAAF in terms of what they permit for the following year. So again, keep that in mind, and at the end of the day, guys, our sport survives off athletes performing well and having names in the paper. We get very little press at the best of times, and we're always fighting against horse racing in that February-March period. The start of footy, everyone's been starved, particularly the Melbourneites, which I am, sort of like Canberra, but Melbourne. So yeah, you're sort of looking forward to the start of the first footy bounce, and you've got rugby, you've got everything. So athletics just get shrunk, and we just don't get the recognition that we deserve. But we can only do that and get recognised if our best athletes are outperforming and performing well. It'll spark attention. And just on that, I mean, I often hear that, no, I'm preparing for Europe, I'm preparing for September, I can't compete. You should never be that far away from where your physical status, your optimal status should be. If you're way down here, yes, I get you preparing, but if our better athletes can't come out and train through a race, they're not going to be at their peak. They're just going to run. It's a training session for them. It shouldn't be any bother to them. So my message is, we need to get out and perform, guys. You don't have to be performing at the highest level, but we have to be committing to some sort of season. Otherwise, our sport doesn't survive. And the very thing that actually helps some of our better athletes, and I'm not just talking distance, I'm talking across the board, the very thing that got our athletes partly to where they've got to and exposed them and got a bit of notoriety and got them into meets in Europe is because of how they perform domestically. Then when you get there, no, I'm sorry guys, I'm preparing for Europe. Come on, give me a break. So yeah, I talked about the shortness of the turnaround, so again you have to factor that in. So the European season in 2020 will look a lot differently. And some athletes may just choose to do an Asian component there, depending on what the program of events is, Diamond League, and how that's going to be structured. And a bit of Europe. Others may just do a short bit and come home and prepare. So they do their final preparation back home and then into our holding camp in Wakayama. So Wakayama is situated about 40 minutes from Osaka Airport, Kansai Airport, which is 1 hour from Tokyo. We used that in 2015. Brent took some walkers back there this year after under 20s, and it's worked well. We've got everything we need there, and basically you're in a bubble for 7 to 10 days before we move into the village. So that'll be roughly the plan in terms of looking at 2020, and we'll be flexible. We're not going to be hard and fast in terms of you must come in on this day. But again, if athletes haven't done any acclimation at all, then we'll be getting them to come in and have the appropriate acclimation period of time. Get your athletes used to Japanese food. If they haven't tried it already, might help, because again, there's a whole lot of different dietary requirements. Yes, there'll be Western food, but again, when you're travelling around the world and travelling in different countries, you can't always get the foods you want. So start experimenting, get your stomach used to different foods. And see if it poses any problems. Then again, you can put in a plan. You'd hate to have your preparation wrecked through some dietary problem you weren't aware of, or your inability to eat sushi or rice or whatever. So again, stupid little things, but think of those things. All right, that pretty much covered what I wanted to talk about, just in terms of the planning, preparation. If there's any questions on altitude or heat, I don't want to stand here too long because we've got another bunch of speakers to come up and get more into the detail and how they've worked it for their athletes. And I think you'll get some very useful data and information, particularly from our next few speakers, who will give you a sort of a first-hand experience of what worked and maybe what didn't work for those athletes. So listen, pick up a few gems and see how you can put it into your program. And again, congratulations on the work you're all doing, and the collaboration, the discussion, the challenging of ideas. It's the only way, not just distance coaches, every coach can grow. And again, the day I stop learning and talking to people and discussing and thinking of ways of challenging myself and challenging other coaches, I'll walk away from it. So keep learning, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a really good job and your athletes are performing super well. Yeah, look forward to the next couple of years. Thanks, guys.
Craig said it'd only be about 15 minutes, so I won't have to talk much now to keep us on schedule. No. Which one are we again? Sorry, was it? The other way.
Going solo.
We'll go old school for about a minute and a half until I get this sorted out. I want to introduce Brent, who has an amazing record with our race walkers. Olympic gold medals, silver medals, the rest of it. Okay, we had a great championship at the Commonwealth Games with gold medals for both women's and men's race walk, with Brent coaching Jemima in the women's. A lot of the talk I've had with Jared of recent times has been all around some of the preparation he did with Brent and lead up to things like Beijing, and it's undoubtedly something that made a huge impact on the performance there. And I think allowing Brent the opportunity to share with you all some of the strategies he's put in place and some of the thoughts on how we might approach the coming championships, I think is invaluable. So I really look forward to listening in on this one, and hope you all learn a great deal. Thanks. I'll get this sorted out.
Thank you. While Adam's sorting out my screen, I'll just start by saying I started this in 2004. I went to the Athens Olympics, and we all know that Athens is a very, very hot place to compete, and particularly in the out-of-stadium events is mainly what I'm going to focus on here, because we're talking about 80, 90-minute events for the walks, and 2 hours 15, 2 hours 30 for the marathons, and up to 4 hours and 50k walk. So the heat and environmental conditions affect those events more than they do most of the in-stadium track and field events, and even some of the distance events inside the stadium are affected less by the conditions, although they are. So the way we started for 2004, don't know how it's not lit up so well there, but we'll get to it, I say, it'll warm up. So in 2004, when I coached Nathan Deeks, he got a bronze medal at that particular Olympic Games. I look back on it now and think if we did things differently, I think he could have won gold a little more comfortably. So as a young coach, we probably weren't doing things as well as we did as we moved on, and I got a bit more inventive and creative and started to use a lot of the knowledge we had in and around the AIS, which was where I was employed at the time. And Nathan personally had this belief that, well, we come from a hot country, so we don't really need to do a lot of it. Having said that, we did get unseasonably warm weather when we came down from altitude, and we spent a 10 to 14 day period in Germany, and not a terribly hot place in the world, but we just pushed back start times a little later in the morning, and we were still out training in high 20s, low 30s, and that was good enough for what we were doing in Athens at the time. Incidentally, we were beaten by 2 athletes at the time who had, I believe, and have found out retrospectively, that they had very, very good altitude and heat models that were better than what we did. And it was after hearing about those stories we decided to do things slightly differently. Jemima Montag was a very, very good story for us after the Commonwealth Games, because one of the things that we do have on Jemima was we actually made her, we had a temperature pill inside Jemima at the time, and we've got core temperature values of what happened during the race for Jemima. So thanks to Jemima, it's very good when you coach a young athlete. I generally do what their coach says, so I'm not at the stage with Jemima where she's going to question everything we want to do with it. So if I say, we'd like you to do this before the race, she just says, nods, you beauty, and away we go. And we'd also know this is a very, very famous image from the Commonwealth Games in the marathon. Now, great for Australia because, we come away with a gold medal. But I can tell you, leading into the Commonwealth Games, none of us were expecting based on historical averages of 22 degrees as a max, none of us really factored in radiant heat, being in the mid-morning sun in a state that doesn't have daylight savings and the sun's up at 5 a.m. And I can tell you that place on the 2 warmest days were when the girls were doing the walks and when the marathons, and they staggered the marathon time, so by the time the men rolled around, the conditions, and anyone who was standing on the side of the road didn't even have to be running to tell you how difficult those conditions were. I also coached the athlete who was second in the women's 20k walk from New Zealand, so they did train together, so we got core temperature values on both of those. And I don't mind telling you that Jemima is athlete A, and we hit a core temperature of 41 degrees. Now, that is above anything that we can get ethics approval for when we run a heat study. So if you get above 40, we actually have to stop you exercising. So we started to do things like measure core temperature on the 6th rep and ignore the 7th and 8th, knowing that she might get above 40 just to squeeze those extra reps in. But a 41 degree core temperature in a race where she did significantly drop pace over the last 5 kilometres, but comparatively to the rest of the field, she increased her gap. So the other athlete is a New Zealand athlete, Alana Barber, a few more years experience, has been in her senior team now for 4 years, and I think Jemima hits those really peak temperatures a lot earlier and gets to a lot higher temperature because as a young athlete she hasn't done a lot of 1 hour, 70, 80 minute sessions in high heat before. So I think And what we expect to see over the next few years is her make some positive adaptations where she's not going to hit those temperatures. And even in the high temperature and humidity races, we don't want her slowing down over the last 5K because that's not going to be the racing pattern of what we're going to face in Doha and Tokyo. As Craig mentioned, at the conclusion of World Juniors, I took the 3 walkers that we had, and we had a very successful World Juniors. We took them home via Wakayama because this was going to be their only chance to experience, if they are lucky enough to make the Tokyo Olympics, it'll be their only chance to experience what the pre-training camp venue and environment is like. And I wanted to get rid of a couple of those things that I heard from their coaches about, you know, it's hot in Perth, but it's not hot and humid in Perth, and it's definitely not hot or humid in Perth in June or July prior to the Olympic Games. So we wanted to take them there after World Juniors, train them for 10 days. We actually did a time trial on about day 7 just for them to experience the difference coming off PBs at World Juniors to what it's actually like to compete in these conditions. And we got more than we bargained for because we actually had a heat wave run through Japan at the time. And that monkey you can see there on that ice block that's what people want to do on a stinking hot day. They want to do that. And that particular monkey is this same type of monkey that spends most of their time sitting in hot water because they live in the cold climates. Now, I did this contrast because we're actually training in the southern states of Australia, preparing for high heat, high humidity races in the northern hemisphere. And these are the things. This is 23rd of July, so if you want to know where these stories come from, this is around the time of the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in 2 years' time. So over the course of this week, they had up to 165 heat-related deaths, mainly in the elderly population. So what we're seeing from the International Olympic Committee is where there is concern, probably less for the athletes, but there's more concern for spectators sitting out in the hot sun, watching a lot of these Olympic events. I'm going to recommend something that we all read. This came to me early last year, and a lot of the things that I'm going to do, and I'm sure Adam will make this available to you all, and I know that Julian, who's down the back of the room, who you'll speak later, had a bit to do with this document. I'll pull out select parts of this document and we'll go through it and how it impacts and how we're going to come around some of the things that we've got coming up. So just to pull a quote out of it straight away, we heard Craig talk about we don't want to be alarmist, but we do want people to understand that according to this document, we're about to face the most challenging environmental conditions ever observed in the modern history of the Olympic Games. We heard Craig talking about Barcelona, Atlanta, I've talked about Athens, Beijing Olympic Games, but this document's talking another level again. Now, some sports that doesn't matter, there's lots of indoor sports, there's lots of water-based sports, but we're probably going to be suffering the most being an outdoor, on-legs, load-carrying type of sport. And we can see there that it's going to detail some of the effects of that. I am going to talk about the way we came around or overcame these problems in 2008, and I know Philo down the back of the room, we worked together very closely with Gary Slater from Nutrition at the time, and we came up with a whole raft of altitude models, heat acclimation, and also ingestion protocols for in-race feeding, which were absolutely paramount. And the difference between Jared coming 3rd or 8th in the 20k, and it also freed him up with a medal in his back pocket to race differently in the 50 than he would have if he didn't have a medal. So our preparation model looked a bit like this. I'm going to show you some data of the 21 days prior to us entering the altitude house. We did a 21-day stint of living in the altitude house, which was at 3,000 metres, and we were training at 600 metres altitude. We came out of the house for an adaptation week, so just to sleep in his own bed, eat his own food, lower the training volume, just to allow some adaptations, a bit of a recovery week. And then we went back in for another 2 weeks. We had about 3 days out of the altitude house, and then he flew and went to Kochi in Japan. So across that, well, we're talking about 97 days now, across that whole period we've got some training markers. mean, the weekly average through that 3-week period was 135 kilometres. That 3-week period had a 20-mile race in the middle of it, so we really trained him in the front half of that week. He finished the week with a 20-mile race. We had a few days off legs and we finished the week with some volume as well, but obviously it's not a 3-week normal training block. When he moved into the altitude house, we're now 6 weeks from departure, this is when we started to do a heat acclimation session. So this is where we're doing, in an artificial heat chamber, 32 degrees, 60 degree, 60% humidity, just easy 1 hour sessions. And we're only doing this once a week. But you can see there the average across those 3 weeks was 171 kilometres. So, I mean, this is not including the warm up and warm downs, it's stuff that's measurable. So we're probably looking at 180, 190 kilometres on legs a week through that period. So it's a big volume, and it took us the whole Olympic cycle to get Jared to those sort of volumes along the way. The week he was out of the house, we not only had a drop in the amount of training that he was doing at race pace, or above 4 millimole thresholds, but we also had just an easier off legs. You know, long walks are a bit less, a couple of afternoon sessions we dropped off. And then we put him back in the altitude house for 2 weeks. So it's a big altitude exposure. I'll make these slides available to everyone through Adam and Athletics Australia, so you can, more than happy for these to be distributed. There's no secrets in this, and it's 10 years old anyway, so so that's, and I tried to summarise this as best we could. Now, we did 6 weeks of heat acclimation. The difference in this last 2 weeks was we took out one of his high intensity sessions that we were doing outdoors, and we did it indoors in the heat chamber. And there was a bit of debate about that. It was pretty hard to convince Jared to sacrifice something that he really valued outdoors to do it indoors and on the treadmill. And that went for about 80 minutes because we spent the first half hour actually bringing his core temperature up through a long warm-up process, and then he started doing either 1K or 1,500 metre reps on the treadmill at race pace. And even in his recovery, we weren't letting him leave the room. So it was quite a brutal experience as well. And then, oh, and by the way, I haven't mentioned this, we've got our daytime 7 a.m. training temperatures down the bottom from when we were in Canberra. And then we all of a sudden go and drop him into an environment where his 7 a.m. temperatures are 26 degrees and 80% humidity. So the 6-week acclimation period leading in was to allow that transition in temperature where we weren't programming intentional drops in intensity. So we, in the last 2-3 weeks before a major championships, you won't find any coaching theory that tells you it'll tell you have to gradually reduce volume. It'll always talk about an increase in intensity as well. Now, one thing we learnt from Osaka the previous year was the minute we arrived into Kochi prior to the Osaka World Championships was the program that I had written on paper we couldn't actually do. Every coach likes to have 5 days out of the championships, I do this key session, 10 days out, I do this other higher volume session, but you're only in the hot weather for your 3rd or 4th day then. And I think we tried to do that, and he slipped off the target times or what we were expecting very early on, and it just became this long suffering session that we probably didn't need to do, and we learned from that the following year. Now, the other thing that this report will talk about is the impacts on the different time of the day and where you're going to be competing. Now, what they're talking about here is the fact that by 11 a.m, some of the most brutal weather conditions to be doing any endurance events is happening. That's the peak point of the day. So that's when we're starting to nudge 30 degrees, the humidity is still 70%, and sunrise is at 5 a.m, so you've got 6 hours and the sun's sitting higher in the sky. One thing we did learn from Kochi is training at 5 p.m, just before sunset, even though it's 32 degrees, was far more mild than 8 a.m. when it was 90% and 26 degrees. So some of the afternoon easy sessions were, we couldn't flip our main session around because we actually had morning races, but I don't know how we're specifically going to do this for evening races in Doha because we've got morning races in Tokyo, so we've got a few challenges over the next little bit. Now that's important because when you look at the only thing we've got as a point of reference was the 2007 results. So the only time we can compare what we're going to face in Tokyo was we had a World Championships in 2007. So that's the result of that particular championships, and you can see there you've got a 7 a.m. start. The race finishes at 10:16. You've got the weather conditions there. It's starting at 28 degrees, it's finishing at 33. Although the winners probably finished when it was 31 or 32. And you've got there what you would consider not fast times. So it has a direct impact on performance. Very good runners still run at World Championships, or it might be debatable whether the best go because of some of the lucrative deals that are on offer on the marathon circuit. But I don't think there's any doubt that Luke Cabetta at that time was the best, if not one of the best marathon runners in the world. But we're only talking a time that was outside of the women's world record. And these things were replicated in the out-of-stadium walk events. The difference being the walkers were finishing after 11 o'clock. And I know that never in a championship was there a bigger disparity between the guys who did well and the rest of the group between 8th, 10th, 12th. So the people who prepared well still did solid times, but the gap between 1st and 8th in this race was made it, when you look at the results, it looks like it was a very almost non-competitive event. And then we had the men's 20k walk, which finished in 34 degrees, and also you can see as the temperature rises, humidity goes down, but I can tell you that was a very, that's one of the slowest performances over the last 20 years to win the championships. So you can see there you've got impact on performance. Now, I thought I'd throw this one in here because I sat in the stadium at the Beijing World Championships in 2015 and watched a lady run sub 11 seconds in 100 metres, and on the same morning there were 2 men running under 44 seconds in 400 metres in round 1. We're not talking semis, finals, it was round 1. So what we're talking about is having a direct impact on performance negatively. The opposite's happening. These guys are actually going to run in favourable conditions, and you might even see some early round times if you're in a competitive heat where these things happen. And this is the first time this has ever happened in the championship. I've never seen a championship where people run under 44 seconds in the 400 metres or women running 10:88 in round 1. I've mentioned it, and I'm hoping that Julian will go over some of these things as well, but this was the thing that we've noticed most is the 3 factors of temperature. We all look at 30 degrees and go, yeah, it's 30 degrees. You combine it with humidity, and the other thing is radiant heat from the sun. And I don't know what the course, I haven't had a look at the course in Tokyo yet. This isn't going to be a problem, of course, for Doha, because everyone knows that we're starting our races at midnight in Doha. So our marathons will be running at 11:59 p.m. till 2 a.m. in the morning, and the walkers, the 50k walks are going to finish till 4 a.m. in the morning. So that's what we've got. So it does increase the heat factor and what we're going to be exposed to. Now the other thing about when looking at temperature is the IAA from its results sheet is switched to a wet bulb temperature. So when you see race results historically, it doesn't look as hot as what it actually is, because a wet bulb temperature reading is a lot more severe than what Jodie Seale's talking about on the weather that she reports on Channel 9 each evening. While I was in Japan earlier this year, I just had a look. Now I prepared this document, and the day that I took this temperature was the day that they announced the start times for the marathon and the walks. Now, they'd already moved it from the 7:30 to 7 a.m, but on this day they announced it was going to be 6 a.m. So we've now got 6 a.m. starts. I did get up the next morning at 5 a.m, which was warm-up time, and note that it was quite clear and it was already warm. And you can see there our guys are going to be warming up in 26 degrees and 99% humidity. So that then is going to adjust how you warm up, I would hope. I'm not going to tell them this much, but we also, every time we watch a cricket match or we watch the Australian Open tennis, they'll tell you it's 50 degrees out on court. You measure temperature in the shade, but you've also got this feels like temperature, and that's a combination of everything: heat, humidity, radiant heat, and obviously once you start moving your body at, whether it be marathon pace at just under 20 kilometres an hour or the men walking at just under 15, you're going to have this is the thing that our organisers are most concerned about, more for the general public who are sitting in stands in direct sunlight. So when they're talking about 50-degree, feels like temperatures, these are what we're running in. And hence the reason why we see our little friend here doing this. I'm just going to move through and show you why that's a problem, because in 2008 we all know that that's the image of the bird's nest, but most of you wouldn't recognise that just outside the bird's nest we had a 1K stretch, a very, what we call Chinese unimaginative way to do a course. It was dead straight, it was 1 kilometre, and you do a point turn and you come around and you do 25 lumps of that, or 10 lumps of that. And you can see there's not any shade at all on that course. So based on what we've just heard, these were pretty tough conditions. I don't know what we're going to get in Tokyo. Doha we're in 9, so it doesn't really matter, but you can see here that these are some of the things that aren't going to work in our favour. Or, if we prepare correctly, these then become your competitive advantage. Now, one of the most, looking at this page in the document, what it does is it actually gives you a nice traffic light system for past Olympic venues and a rating on. There you go, you've got alarming, challenging and tolerable. So if we use that rating and check past results, there's all your race results from Osaka, and that's in your alarming. There's all the venues that were listed as challenging, and if I've averaged those performances, you can see there that past hot weather events, athletes are still able to do well in those conditions. Now, if we go to the events that was considered, what we consider this, what was the definition they used, but you can see here there's not much difference between some favourable conditions and challenging, but the difference between challenging and alarming really plays its part. So again, we're only talking the stadium events here. Once we get over 50, 60 minutes of high intensity aerobic activity, then you're going to see that it impacts on time. So we know that they're going to be slower times, but we also see some surprise results in these conditions as well. Now, if we're looking at the suitability of our competitors, I'm going to reference this with some of these championships and what I know about what's happening in certain event groups. What we've got here is Japan should be at a distinct advantage, and I know that they have a targeted event policy, and right now their men's race walking team is the #1 in the world in the absence of the Russians, and they've just eclipsed the Chinese, and they've even come to the AOS to do training camps, and they bring a service support around them, which I find unbelievable. So they're coming into the AOS that had all of this living on site, and they actually travel with team doctors, physios, environmental physiologists, and a whole team of staff, and they just fly in and out support staff. So they are way ahead of what we were doing in 2008, and we had a good depth in our program, and they've even got better depth now. And to make things worse, this is their recent record. They've got the world record holder in men's 20k walk. They had silver and bronze medal in London last year in a 50k walk, and as a point of reference, we all know that Japanese has a great marathon and running culture without having the very best in the world. But in 2007, they had 4 in the top 8 in Osaka at the World Champs Marathon. So that doubles as a World Cup event. So the one on the photo there is them winning a medal in the Teams Championships, or actually winning the Teams Championships. And then we've got the 2 walkers from London last year. China is another nation that they've got very similar environmental conditions, and they've also got a short travel time, and they've also got such a big country with all sorts of environmental conditions, from having altitude centres all over the place and also some very hot humid weather to contend with. And they've also got the current Olympic champions in the men's 20k, men's and women's 20k walk, and also one of those ladies is the world record holder. So for me, this is what we're taking on. And then we've got something that I've taken advantage of lately is I've just discovered altitude venues in South America, because most of our altitude regions around the world are closed to us half a year because of ski seasons, and we go to these equatorial regions, and our guys have been going to Bogota lately at 2,500 metres, which has a min of 10 and a max of 20 all year round. It rains a little more at some times of the year, but they are also only a couple of hours away from high heat, high humidity coastal regions. And so what we can see is Brazil has that, and for Colombia, they've actually got the reigning world champion in the men's 20k walk, and they've got a young girl who was fifth. So we're already identifying who our competitors are and what they're likely to bring. So I talked about it being a competitive advantage, but I'm also suggesting that there's going to be other countries who we know are doing things that are going to make it hard for us. I haven't got anything here, but I was going to throw this in because we actually have our own venues here, and this was going to be a little video of, if anyone's seen it, Ronnie Johns doing the Chopper Reed impersonation of, I'll give you a weather forecast for Darwin. Said for the next 100,000 years it's just effing hot. Right, so we actually have some really good venues here. So we need to be going to, I know our distance runners went to Cairns recently. I'm going to go to Cairns next year with our guys, and I know that we've used Darwin in the past. And as a young fellow, I grew up in Darwin. I know that it's also very hot and humid there, and we need to start doing short doses of heat acclimatisation when we can through these areas here. So this is essentially where Jemima's going to be for the next 12 months. So I basically started with November and we're going all the way down to Doha. Her qualification period is open, she's got a qualifying time, we're expecting her to be going, and we're planning accordingly around that. And what we can see there is I've tried where I can to have regular doses of where she's going to be training in 30 degrees. And what I've then got over there, we've got heat training. I've got how we can offset some of these by doing either heat acclimation or some passive heat training. So what we're trying to do is once we've got her in a state where she has acclimatised, we've basically got her ready to race in those environments, we are then going to make sure she doesn't go through a de-acclimatisation process too deep into the winter months in Australia. And we're very lucky to do that because we've got a World University Games to go to, and we're just going to keep her overseas for that length of time. And we're going to put her in a training environment where I can find senior elite female walkers for her to train with and be in a positive training environment, also with some good weather as well. Now, to do some of that, I'm just going to show you. This is the way we did it in 2008. Philo, I remember it took us a long time to work out how to pitch a tent in the biomechanics lab and get that up to 32 degrees. And there's an in-ground treadmill there that Jared walked on. And this is the way we did things in 2007 and 8. This was also a really good way to incorporate some sports science into our daily training environment. So the two blokes in the tent there with him are Philo and Gary. Gary Slater was doing all sorts of things around hydration status, so Jared had to present in a hydrated state. We were measuring sweat rates, ingestion protocols. We then started to work out and calculate what he actually needed to be drinking and ingesting during his event. So we got to the stage where we knew, and I can't remember exactly, but a number just jumped into my head. I think it was 146 millilitres per lap of an event. We knew that in the 50k he'd come past every 8 minutes 40 to 9 minutes. So the person on the drink table's job was, he had a bottle, we had pre-mixed fluids, we knew that we were trying to get in approximately 60 to 70 grams of carbohydrate per hour of exercise. So the dose was pre-mixed. The person on the drink table had a line on the bottle that corresponded to the amount of liquid he needed to drink. It was filled to that line. So second job was he held the bottle out, Jared had to drink what he was given. We topped up his grams per carbohydrate by gels that way. We actually took that to a new level when we went to 2012. He did a 3 hour 36 minute, which is the current Olympic record, and he was 89 grams of carbohydrate per hour exercise. So these are the things that we were doing, but we weren't able to do unless we did this type of thing in the lead up. In that last 2 weeks, I was talking about the last 2 weeks of altitude, this is the type of session that we did. So you can see here it's got treadmill speed 13 kilometres down to 16.1. If anyone knows what an old commercial gym treadmill is, that's as fast as it would go, but that just so happened to be, 3 minutes 48 a kilometre or 3:43 I think it was. That's pretty much as fast as we could walk. And we've got lactate readings there as well. We've got temperature, humidity. So 31.6 degrees and 60% with no airflow passing over you in a confined space is really, really tough. So that's probably, it can be as probably even more than what they'll face out there as well. So that was the last 2 weeks. We did 1k reps 1 week, and I think the next week we were doing 1500 metre reps. Each session he was given a feedback sheet like this. You won't be able to read this, but this is, in red there is feedback from Gary Slater, our dietitian, and it gives things like weighting USG, how much he ingested during the session, what his sweat rates were. So these are the things that was going on. This is how we integrated sports science into what we were doing on a daily basis. This is the type of sessions we did once we landed in Kochi. So whether you want to call it a threshold, tempo, or time trial, but he did a 14-kilometre session. This was about 10 days out from his first race, averaging 4:06 a kilometre. That's 1 hour 22 for a 20k. We weren't quite. At the time, we were probably thinking the race was going to be run in about 1 hour 21, but it turned out to be a 1 hour 19 race, and so that was a bit faster than what we forecast. Jared also was able to close in Beijing his last 10k at a PB of 38.59, so 3:54 a k. So we never in our imagination did we even envisage that one he would be able to replicate those times in Beijing, and also we'll hopefully win a medal, but that's the type of session. So there are the only 2 high quality sessions we did while we were in Kochi, and we did some 1k reps. Actually, he did some 400 reps on the track one evening as well. Now what we've got now is, these are some of the other things that we can do. So in that time when we're starting to deacclimatise and we're not in weather environments that are conducive, we're going to start to do some of this post-sauna in a spa bathing or sauna bathing. And we ran a study last year at the, that's one of the things we will do. I'll talk about the other one. Pre-calling, haven't mentioned this. We were the only ones who were brave enough to actually tell your athlete that what we're going to do is we're going to submerge you in an ice bucket before you race. And again, when you've got a young athlete, it's very, very easy to sell that because they'll follow you blindly. It's only when you get the older athletes who are experienced, it's very hard to convince them to do that. So what we did do, and this is the research that was done by Meg Ross, who's still at the AOS and still very much part of what we do and how we're preparing for Doha and Tokyo. So you're basically going to get a drop in your core temperature pre-race, and it will remain lower for 20 minutes. It buys you 20 minutes. What we found is we get to halfway point in the race and favourites were dropping off the lead pack, and Jared's just thinking, when's the race going to start? And actually was feeling pretty good. He'll still hit high temperatures later in the race, which mine will as well, but this, I can tell you, is one of the, until people do it and do it properly and actually commit to doing it, we're very lucky that I haven't seen too many others doing it unless they've been involved with us, but I don't understand why people are not doing it. If you talk to the great Dick Telford about it, he said, oh yeah, we did this research in the 90s, but we didn't publish it because we didn't want anyone else to know. But he did the research on it, but they couldn't actually get athletes to do it before a race. So this is some of the things that we do. So bottom left-hand picture there is an example of, we went to our 2012 Olympic trial in Hobart. We had a 38-degree day, which I think was the second hottest day on record in Hobart. But we were doing that pre-race 2007, 2008. The second photo is, what then happens is, we just pop a cooling vest on, which is more about just keeping you cool. If you're lucky, you'll walk into an air-conditioned cool room, and that's Jared going out to race the 50k. and we were doing it pre-debut as well, so you can see there that this became a regular thing that we were doing in hot weather events. It's not always the easiest thing, and you've got to take a lot of ice baths if everyone wants to do it. Yeah. All right. So just some basics behind this. We do a light warm up first, so your body is actually already has its cooling system activated and it's giving off heat. We don't drop them into ice water. We put them into tepid or tap water, and then we add ice. Ideally, you've got to go on quite a big length of time. But our guys are literally stepping out of the ice water, putting their uniform on and going into the pool room. So, I was talking about before, warm-up becomes less important for us than the pre-form. And you'll find that every hot weather championship has a nice pedestrian pace at the start anyway, so it doesn't really, it's almost like they do their warm-up in their first K of the race, and that's definitely going to be the case in the 50K and 20K and also the marathon events. This was another way we did it. So we did some pre-cooling research last year in January. So this is a more practical way. It's a lot easier to get a slush in your bucket of ice and some towels. But there's also the ingestion protocols, so you can actually internal cool. I know that the cyclists did that in 2008. We didn't do it in 2008 because we felt the volume of liquid that you're putting in your stomach. You know, when you're walking and running, your stomach's essentially a washing machine. So for the cyclists, it's a lot easier than it is for our guys. But we trialled that, and we're also doing some of the menthol, which also almost triggers your brain to think that you're cooler than what you are. So that's some of the research that we're doing. This year's research is around, we're doing the post-training spa and sauna bathing. So afternoon easy sessions is what we're doing. So in terms of what we're going to do now, we do plan to do annual camps in Waikoyama. I really was hoping we could practice 2019 prior to 2020. It's just not going to be feasible for us to come back from Europe, via Japan, and then off to Doha in terms of when you're looking at flights. And I'm not uncomfortable about training in hot and humid and competing in hot and dry. And I think the benefits for doing that would be strong, but I still haven't worked out exactly what we're going to do in that last 10 days prior to actually going into Doha yet. I've got a few options. Philo was just talking about Tenerife. I know Cyprus has come up, and whether we just maintain some of our treadmill heat stuff in that last 10 days, and exactly the timing of when we arrive in Doha is also, I've never been there, I know people who have, but I don't think it's a conducive training environment. But I'm more concerned about Tokyo than I am about Doha. We've got heat acclimation before arriving in, so I'm a big fan of acclimation before acclimatisation because you won't actually not have to modify your training too much in that first 5 to 6 days when you arrive in a hot weather venue. You do actually want to just step off the plane and start to do your intensity days when you need to do them. And we've got options of University of Canberra and Victoria University have good environmental chambers, and I know the VIS has just behind their office block they've got a tent set up where you can actually wheel in treadmills, and very similar to the one I showed you before. We've also got Darwin's cans as options as well for domestic heat cans. I was talking about our January heat study, and this is a 3-day period or a sample of what we're doing. So we're just doing easy walks. That's a Monday, some reps on a Monday evening. But on Tuesday and Wednesday, after the afternoon session, the guys are then going to go and submerge themselves in the spa for, they say 40 minutes we put in, but I'm trying to negotiate that down a bit because I know how uncomfortable that is. We're actually doing this in January as well, so they're actually going to be out in 30 degrees anyway when they're doing this. So we're going to go pretty aggressively this January in doing it, because before we actually want to introduce it and work out what our protocols are for 2020, we want to actually trial and get the athletes used to the idea of doing it this way. So these guys will be monitored for core temperature while they're doing this as well. I would just say that the pre-cooling aspect, I can tell you that first and second, so Jemima and Alana Barber finished 2% outside of their qualification time at the event at Gold Coast. The next best in the race was 5%, and most of the race finished between 8 and 10%. That's how much it affected performance, and I think that's how much the pre-crawling, more than the other stuff we did, had a direct impact on the day. And I really think that that's something that we need to practice, rehearse, get your athletes comfortable with the idea of doing it, and it may even help us to actually go and seek out some hot weather events just to practice it before. So things that are not important, we know that marathoners are very much locked into their marathon choices around how fast they can run and appearance fees and things like that. But with a view to Tokyo, it wouldn't hurt for them to go into a half marathon and practice these type of things if it is at all possible, or even in a training sense. So I know that by the time we rock into 2020, we'll have a plan refined in what we want to do for Jemima, and hopefully that's going to give us a competitive advantage, because at the moment she's about 5 minutes off the best girls in the world. We're going to close that by 2 or 3 minutes, but on the day we're hoping